At 5 a.m. in New York, the sky is holding a very particular tension. The Sun has just stepped into Pisces at 1:46, joining Mercury, Venus and the North Node in that sign. At the same time, the Moon is moving through Aries at 8 degrees 13 minutes, sitting close to Saturn at 0 degrees 43 minutes Aries and Neptune at 0 degrees 44 minutes Aries. Water and fire are both active. Sensitivity and urgency. Dissolving and initiating, layered into the same morning. When the Sun enters Pisces, the tone of the collective atmosphere shifts almost immediately. The sharp edges of decision-making soften, strategy gives way to sensing. Conversations feel less about outcomes and more about undercurrents. Mercury and Venus in Pisces slow down the mental pace and blur the usual lines between logic and feeling. You may notice that what matters today isn't how fast you can solve something, but whether it feels right when you sit with it quietly. And yet, the Moon in Aries does not want to sit. Aries is immediate. It wants momentum. It wants to clear the air, send the message, make the move. With Saturn and Neptune both at the very beginning of Aries, there is a rawness to this impulse. Saturn adds weight and responsibility. Neptune adds fog. You may feel a strong push to act, but without the crisp certainty you're used to. This is not abstract astrology happening somewhere far away. It shows up as a subtle internal contrast. One part of you wants to pull back, to rest in something quieter and more reflective. Another part feels restless, almost impatient, as if something needs to be handled now. That is the inner shift of the day. Not dramatic, not catastrophic, just a shift in orientation. The external world may look the same, but internally, the compass feels slightly recalibrated. You are moving from a season of definition into a season of diffusion, while still carrying a spark of urgency in your chest. Part of you wants to slow down and feel what's real. Part of you wants to act before the window closes. Staying oriented when clarity feels thin begins with acknowledging that both of those impulses are present. When this kind of sky sets in, the first place it registers is not in your calendar. It registers in your body. You may wake up already slightly alert, even if you slept enough hours. The Moon in Aries can create a low-level internal activation, like your system is leaning forward before you consciously decide to. Your heart rate might feel just a bit quicker. Your thoughts may start running before your feet hit the floor. There's that pressure in the chest, the kind that doesn't shout, but insists. A quiet signal that something in you is already preparing to move. At the same time, the Sun, Mercury and Venus in Pisces create a very different current. Instead of sharp mental clarity, there's a softness. You might stare at the ceiling for a few extra seconds. You might reach for your phone, then pause, not fully wanting to engage. The edges of motivation feel thinner. Not gone, just less defined. This is where the contrast becomes tangible. Fire in the body often feels like heat, tightness, forward motion. You walk a little faster. You type more forcefully. You replay a conversation in your head and imagine what you should have said. Aries energy wants to resolve friction immediately. It does not enjoy unfinished business. But water in the system feels like diffusion. You might feel slightly foggy, not confused exactly, but less crisp. Sounds feel louder, light feels brighter. Other people's moods register more strongly. Pisces season increases permeability. Your nervous system may be more open than usual. When Saturn and Neptune are both at the very beginning of Aries, this becomes even more layered. Saturn can show up as a heaviness behind the eyes, or a sense of responsibility sitting on your shoulders. Neptune can feel like a lack of edges, like you're not entirely sure where your motivation ends and your anxiety begins. You might notice small, early signals: a tightening in your jaw when you think about a decision, a shallow breath when you consider sending that message, a flicker of irritation that feels bigger than the situation deserves. Or the opposite, a sudden wave of empathy that softens your reaction, a desire to step outside and just look at the sky for a minute, a sense that pushing harder won't actually solve what's underneath. Chiron in Aries adds another subtle layer. For some, the body memory of "I need to prove myself" can activate quickly under Aries transits. That can feel like urgency, like if you don't respond now, you'll fall behind. If you don't assert yourself, you'll disappear. But the Pisces cluster is asking for something different. It's asking you to feel before you fix, to notice before you declare, to let your body speak before your mind takes over. Today, staying oriented begins with noticing the very first signals, not the dramatic ones, the early ones. The way your shoulders rise when you check your email, the way your stomach tightens when you imagine confrontation, the way your breathing changes when you allow yourself to slow down. Clarity may feel thin, but sensation is not thin. If you can stay with the physical cues, without immediately converting them into action, you start to understand what this transit is actually teaching. Fire wants movement, water wants attunement. Your body is where those two negotiate. In daily life, this contrast doesn't announce itself as astrology. It shows up in small, ordinary moments. You might wake up and immediately think about something unfinished, an email you haven't answered, a conversation that still feels slightly open-ended, a decision at work that needs clarity. The Aries moon amplifies that internal nudge. Handle it. Don't let it sit. But when you actually open your laptop or start typing the message, something feels less solid than usual. The Pisces Sun and Mercury soften your mental edges. You reread what you wrote and it doesn't quite land. Not because it's wrong, but because you're sensing more than just the surface issue. At work, this can look like trying to push through a task that suddenly feels abstract. You know what needs to be done, but your motivation comes in waves. You launch into a task with heat, and minutes later, you're staring at the same screen, slipping into reflection before you even realize you slowed down. Or you may feel ready to confront a problem, only to realize you need more emotional clarity first. In relationships, the same pattern applies. The fire says, "Clear the air now." The water says, "Feel what's underneath before you speak." You might notice yourself drafting a direct message, then pausing. Not out of fear, but because you sense there's more going on beneath the obvious irritation. For those who have been operating in productivity mode for months, this can feel destabilizing. You may wonder if you're losing momentum, if you're becoming less decisive, if something is wrong with your drive. But Mars and Pluto in Aquarius suggest that your participation in systems, whether career, community, or social media, is already shifting. You may no longer feel the same need to argue, prove, or perform. The old way of pushing through friction may feel less appealing. Meanwhile, Jupiter in Cancer points towards something quieter. Growth through emotional steadiness, through tending your space, through choosing conversations that feel safe rather than impressive. In the middle of a busy day, you might notice that the most grounding moment comes not from checking off a task, but from stepping outside for 5 minutes and breathing. Even your routine can feel slightly altered. With Uranus in Taurus, subtle shifts in how you approach money, food, or your body may be underway. You might question whether your current pace is sustainable, whether the way you structure your day actually supports you. None of this requires dramatic change today. It simply means that the water and the fire are both present in your daily rhythm. You may move quickly in 1 hour, then crave quiet in the next. You may feel bold in the morning, then contemplative by afternoon. Staying oriented when clarity feels thin doesn't mean forcing certainty. It means recognizing that the tension you feel in work, in communication, in decision-making is not a malfunction. It is the lived expression of this sky. The core pattern of the day lives in the space between impulse and intention. You feel the impulse clearly. The Aries moon does not hide it. There is a desire to act, to resolve, to move something forward. Saturn in early Aries adds a layer of responsibility, almost like a voice saying, if you're going to do this, do it with integrity. Take ownership, be direct. But Neptune at 0 degrees Aries blurs the edges of that impulse. It softens the target. It diffuses the straight line. You may want to act, but the reason underneath your action feels less defined. Is this clarity or discomfort with uncertainty? Is this conviction or anxiety about being still? That is the pattern. The clarity is thin, but the urgency is loud. It's a strange duet. One part of you barefoot on water, the other already reaching for the door. In the past, when clarity was thin, you might have waited, or you might have forced a decision just to regain a sense of control. Today offers a different option. Notice the gap. Stay inside it for a moment. When you feel the push to send the message, make the announcement, or commit to the plan, pause just long enough to ask, what state am I moving from? Is my body tight and braced, or steady and open? This is not about suppressing action, it's about aligning action. Pisces season shifts the way clarity works. It is less about sharp definitions and more about resonance. The sun in Pisces does not demand that you know exactly where you are going. It asks whether what you are about to do feels compassionate, honest, and internally coherent. When clarity feels thin, the mind may panic. It may try to create certainty by over-planning, but the water element does not respond to force. It responds to attunement. So the pattern of the day is not confusion, it is recalibration, not a loss of direction, but a different relationship to direction. Instead of acting because you can see 10 steps ahead, you act because the next small step feels clean. The fire still burns. The impulse is still there, but it is being asked to move through water. That tension is the lesson. To understand why this pattern is so strong today, we need to look again at the sky, not as abstract symbols, but as mirrors of lived experience. The sun has just entered Pisces at 1:46, and it's not alone. Mercury at 19:48, Venus at 12:29, and the North Node at 9:30 are all in Pisces as well. That is a significant concentration of water. When this much Pisces energy gathers, the atmosphere becomes porous, boundaries soften, time feels less linear. You may sense more than you can clearly articulate. Pisces does not operate through sharp edges. It operates through resonance, through feeling, through subtle shifts in tone and meaning. When the sun moves here, your central organizing principle shifts from control to attunement. You begin to navigate by what feels coherent rather than what looks efficient. Now place that next to the moon in Aries at 8 degrees 13 minutes, with Saturn at 0 degrees 43 minutes Aries, and Neptune at 0 degrees 44 minutes Aries. Aries is the first spark, the raw assertion of I am. Saturn in Aries asks that this assertion be responsible, grounded, mature. Neptune in Aries dissolves rigid definitions of who that I even is. So if your motivation feels unstable, flickering, that's not a glitch. It's the sky tugging at the very place where instinct and identity meet. The very sign that governs identity and initiative is being infused with both structure and fog. The result is not paralysis, it is complexity. Chiron in Aries at 23 degrees 39 minutes adds another layer. Old stories about proving yourself, being first, being enough, can quietly resurface under Aries transits. When clarity feels thin, those old patterns may try to take over. You might feel compelled to act quickly just to reassure yourself that you are still decisive, still competent. Meanwhile, Mars at 21 degrees 58 minutes Aquarius and Pluto at 4 degrees 17 minutes Aquarius suggest that the way you assert yourself in groups, in systems, in public spaces is undergoing a deeper transformation. This is not about a single decision today. It is about a longer arc of redefining how you participate and where your energy goes. Jupiter in Cancer at 15 degrees 39 minutes anchors all of this in something softer. Emotional safety becomes the stabilizing factor, not ambition, not image, safety. The IC in Taurus and ASC in Capricorn reinforce this need for groundedness and sustainability. Stability is being redefined from the inside out. So the pattern of thin clarity is not a flaw in your thinking, it is a reflection of a sky where water dominates the core identity point and fire is being reshaped at its source. The fog you feel is not emptiness, it is transition. When fire meets water at the beginning of a new cycle, action has to pass through feeling. That is the deeper astrological reason this day asks you to slow down just enough to sense what is real before you move. There is an old way many of us were taught to interpret days like this. When clarity feels thin, we assume something is wrong. We assume we're behind. We assume we're losing our edge. Especially if you're someone who once identified strongly with being decisive, driven, or ahead of the curve. An Aries moon can amplify the discomfort of not having a clean answer. Under this sky, it's easy to tell yourself a story. I need to push harder. I need to lock something in. I need to reassert who I am. But with Neptune at 0 degrees Aries and the Sun freshly in Pisces, the old definition of strength is being gently questioned. Strength is no longer only speed. It's no longer only certainty. It's not about being the first to move or the loudest in the room, but there's another kind of courage here, the kind that doesn't roar, the kind that asks you to stay present when the old version of you wants to run, the courage to not know immediately, the courage to let an identity soften without panicking, the courage to admit that something you used to be sure about now feels different. In past cycles, you may have built parts of your identity around clarity and control, around having a plan, around being the one who could handle it. And that part of you is not wrong, it served a purpose. But this Pisces transit suggests that there is more to you than your ability to execute, more to you than your productivity, more to you than your decisiveness. When clarity thins, it doesn't mean you are dissolving into nothing. It may mean that the version of you that relied on sharp definitions is expanding, not disappearing, expanding. The reframe is simple but not always easy. Instead of interpreting uncertainty as weakness, you can see it as sensitivity. Instead of reading the fog as failure, you can read it as transition. Instead of forcing yourself back into an old rhythm, you can allow a new rhythm to emerge. There was a time when pushing harder felt like power. Under this sky, attunement may be the stronger move. Not because you are special, not because you are chosen, but because growth sometimes looks like letting go of the need to prove who you are, and trusting that who you are is not erased by a day without perfect clarity. Integration today is not about mastering the tension. It is about learning how to stand inside it without rushing to resolve it. You do not need a dramatic ritual. You do not need a new system. The practice is smaller than that. When you feel the Aries impulse rise, the urge to act, respond, correct, assert, pause just long enough to feel your feet on the ground. Notice the quality of your breath. Is it shallow and quick, or steady and deep? Let one exhale be slightly longer than the inhale. This small shift alone can recalibrate the nervous system. Then, instead of asking, "What should I do?" ask, "What feels clean?" A clean action today won't be loud. It's the kind of choice that barely makes a sound, but you feel the entire system exhale when you make it. It is not performative. It does not require you to defend yourself afterward. It may be as simple as sending a short, clear message instead of a long, emotional one, or choosing to wait until tomorrow because your body says you need more clarity. The Pisces cluster reminds you that permeability is not weakness, it is information. If you feel more sensitive today, that sensitivity can guide you. It can show you where you are overextended, where you are forcing something that wants to soften, where you are speaking from tension rather than truth. Jupiter in Cancer suggests that creating emotional steadiness is not avoidance. It is strategy. A warm meal, a tidy space, a conversation where you don't have to explain yourself. These are not distractions from growth. They are the ground that allows growth to happen without collapse. And with Mars and Pluto in Aquarius shaping a longer arc of transformation, you don't need to solve the future today. You only need to stay honest in this moment. One aligned action is more stabilizing than 5 reactive ones. Fire wants to leap. Water wants to merge. You are not required to choose one over the other. The integration is this: move, but from steadiness. Feel, but without losing yourself. Let clarity be thinner than usual, without assuming you are off track. Staying oriented today means trusting that awareness itself is forward motion. As the day moves toward evening and the Pisces energy settles in more deeply, you may notice the urgency in your system begin to soften. The Aries spark doesn't disappear, but it quiets enough for you to hear yourself more clearly. This is often the moment when the fog feels less threatening and more like space. Space to breathe, space to sense, space to simply be without forcing direction. Closing a day like this is not about tying everything together. It's about acknowledging that you moved through contrasting elements without collapsing into either extreme. You let the fire rise without letting it run your day. That's no small thing. You felt the water without letting it pull you under. That balance alone is a kind of quiet accomplishment. You don't need to declare a new version of yourself or decide what tomorrow must look like. Pisces season works gently through softening rather than shaping. Let tonight be part of that softening. Let the questions you still carry rest a little. Let the clarity that didn't arrive today wait for a moment when it can land cleanly. If you want a simple closing practice, you might take one slow breath and ask yourself, gently and without analysis, which part of me moved today and which part of me stayed still? There is no right answer, only awareness. Thank you for spending this time tuning into the sky and into yourself. If these reflections help you stay oriented when clarity feels thin, you're welcome to stay connected and return for the next transit. We'll keep navigating this landscape together, one day, one breath, one small alignment at a time.